Everybody, it's Kristy Galas here with a very special follow-up interview with Tanya Singer. I last had her on the program about 3 years ago when she was here talking about the little red dress. And actually, we have had amazing interactions, not online. What a concept since then. And I've actually had people recently saying, we need to follow up with Tanya Singer, and I couldn't agree more. So welcome back.
Thank you. It's so nice to be here with you.
Do you want to just catch us up on what you've been up to these past 3 years since you've been on the program?
So, last we left off, I was doing it along for the little red dress, and I have continued to research stories of knitting and the Holocaust, which is my sort of strange little way of finding strength through stories of knitting and knits that survived, and the strength that the craft and crafted items gave to women who lived through what I consider the worst moment probably in history of the world. And so I've continued to do that. I published some additional stories about some of these amazing women. One of the women actually just turned 111 years old last month. Her name is Rose Giron. She knit in the Shanghai ghetto. When she fled from Germany, she went to the last open port in the world, which was Shanghai. And she knit for a living in Shanghai. And then a lot of people probably know her. She ran a knit shop in Forest Hills on Austin Street, which just must have been an incredible place. So I wrote about her. And then I wrote about a blue sweater that is connected to the holiday of Passover and a very special survivor named Helena Weinrausch. And so I've continued to sort of do this work, and then sort of through this process, I ended up joining Tablet magazine, which started as a Jewish publication, but now is broader than that, and is really just about the world and this moment that we're in, and sort of looking critically at the world we're living in. And so I work primarily in the podcast studio at Tablet, but so sort of still in the world of my research and knitting, and now Jewish media.
I'm going to be linking to these articles with this interview, and you must read them. And reading the connection that they had, I knew that Dinah had this customer who was 110. I never knew the history behind her and her shop, and you can see glimpses of her influence on Dinah's shop because I know she worked there for I think 15 years. The article said. And Dinah does finishing, and Dinah does go the extra mile with her customers. So you can really see how she's carrying that tradition on, which is incredible. And her whole story, I mean, you just breezed by it. The last port in Shanghai, she knit for a living. I mean, you breezed over it, but it's almost like I read a novel in reading your just short article. I mean, it should be a movie. It should be a novel. It's incredible.
It is incredible. And knitting is a main character, which to me makes these stories, so I'm so invested in these stories, and you see, it's like we know intuitively that our craft gives us so much. But when you really see in these unbelievable historical moments that feel like cinematic, feel like a huge movie, if only they were just a movie and they were fiction, it's incredible. Like, you really see the power of our craft, and it was the center of Rose's life, and how many generations of knitters she's touched.
And Helena wears this sweater. So remind me, it was gifted to her from it was from Anne Rothman, is that right?
Yeah.
So they were both survivors of the Holocaust. In fact, Helena lost 16 of her family members, including her core family. And I think what I understand is once she had survived was it the Death March we called it, or the Death Walk?
Death March, yeah.
Death March. She connected with this master knitter who knit her the sweater in 1947, I think the article said.
Yeah.
You would never know it's that old, 75 years old. And so it's this treasured object for her because I imagine it represents survival, going forward. And one of the favorite things I read, she vowed that when she was in the camps that she would eat whatever she wanted when she could. And so, she's living this full life. She's living her life to the fullest. And she brings out this sweater, this object that is knitted every Passover to represent that.
Yeah, I mean, Passover is the festival of freedom. It's a very big deal for us. And it's again, like we're getting into Bible a lot today, but it's like, it's a very central thing. It's this promise from God to the Jewish people that we would suffer, we would be strangers in a strange land, and that God would bring us out of Egypt, out from bondage, out from slavery. So much of like sort of these feelings of Jewish empathy, these caring for others and caring for the stranger because we were strangers, comes from our experience as slaves. And every year when we have a Passover Seder or meal, there's a very specific structure to that meal. And we are meant to imagine that each one of us was a slave in Egypt. It's like in the writing of that holiday. And so in the case of Helena and Anne, they were actually brought into freedom from the most horrific conditions. And in fact, Helena was actually loaded onto a truck. She was believed to be dead. There was nothing left. She was skin and bone. And then one soldier sort of saw the way her leg moved, and thought like there might be life there, and literally pulled her out of a pile. So it's horrors like you never wanted to know about. And that sweater is actually what started me down the rabbit hole with all of my research. It was never something I thought about, that a sweater could be almost a ritual object, that when you think of the objects like in church or in synagogue, there's very specific objects. There's a lot of rules about who touches them, when they touch them, all of this stuff. But like, here's a sweater that becomes part of her ritual of celebrating Passover, and that she connected the sweater to her feelings of freedom and only wears it on this festival of freedom. Just kind of blew my mind. And it was knit by Anne, who was a master knitter who knit for Nazi wives in order to stay alive. And so even the notion that this was something I just never came across in learning about the Holocaust and learning about Jewish history, was like, oh, but then of course, in retrospect, like, of course you would do whatever you could to stay alive. And so if you're lucky enough to be a knitter, you're going to turn to knitting either for your own emotional well-being or for warmth. But if it means survival, like, for sure, you're going to do it. So I collaborated with a Jewish designer named Alex Kramer. I actually have a sample of the sweater here. I mocked the first one up myself. This is Asylum Fibers, Stephanie's yarn. And I don't know if you can tell here, this is the Surrey silk. It's got that big balloony sleeve. And Helena's got a very snug bodice. This is a little bit of a looser bodice, but it is just like so vibrant. It telegraphs life and joy and freedom, if you will. I mean, it's just magnificent. So this gives me a lot of happiness. And I did a knit along after this story was published and the pattern was published. And it makes me so happy to see like a world of women who have this blue sweater. And I actually met up with one of the women recently at a different event after October 7th, which was a really tough time for us. She had the blue sweater on. And there's so much in that object and in the idea of wearing it that gives me hope and feelings of like, we're going to get through this moment.
So thank you for sharing about the knit along. I will link to that pattern as well.
So October 7th, it was a huge Jewish holiday for us, a very joyous holiday. Israel is constantly under rocket fire from its neighbors to the north and in Gaza. So I thought, like, wow, that's a lot of rockets. Like, this map is like covered. Like, this is strange. Put the phone down. It was about midnight, so it's about 6 a.m. there. So what I was seeing was the beginning of this horrible Black Saturday or Black Shabbat, it's Black Sabbath, as people call it. And I went to bed. And then in the morning, I woke up, looked at the phone, and it was just my worst nightmare, all of our worst nightmare, seeing images of, I have a redheaded daughter, seeing images of the Bibas family, the mother with her two babies trying to cling to them, and the look of pure terror on her face. And Noah Argamani, the young woman whose mother we've since learned has brain cancer, terminal brain cancer, being taken away on a motorcycle, screaming for her boyfriend, who we've now learned probably died. Just watching people running from the party. I couldn't even count. It was like, this image of these dirt fields and then just hordes of partygoers running barefoot, in little clothes from partying all night. I couldn't even understand it. And should we be afraid? Should we be afraid to go to synagogue today? Are we going to be targeted? Which I'm aware of every single time I go to pray in a Jewish space. I am afraid. I'm aware. I don't say I'm afraid. I'm aware of the potential for danger, which is a terribly sad thing that one should have to think about. So that was the feeling of October 7th. And like all moments, I turned to my community. I turned to my Jewish community. I turned to my craft community. And you immediately, I'm looking at this bright blue, you immediately posted yourself in a beautiful bright blue outfit. And in my self-absorbed way of thinking, I felt supported by you, and you're nodding.
I'm glad you got it.
I got it. I got it. I immediately felt supported, and I immediately felt like, okay, there's love. And I have to say, like, it was quiet. It was really quiet. And there were people who have been so vocal and such advocates for so many things. And I just saw quiet and a lack of any kind of empathy in the moment of like, you're seeing what I'm seeing, right? I watched how Ravelry had a million craft alongs going on. Not a single pattern popped up as it did with Ukraine. Not a single sign of nothing of solidarity in my what I thought was my community. And that really felt bad. Fortunately for me, I'm in a lot of groups. I'm in WhatsApp groups. I'm on Facebook. I follow Israeli knitters. And so I look to Israelis who have to live with far more danger than I'm very fortunate to be where I am. And I watched what they were doing. And I started to understand immediately like the scope of the evacuee issue, how hundreds of thousands of families, of people were displaced overnight, had to just get up, leave their homes, have no idea if their home is intact, if they'll ever be back in their home. These homes are still being barraged with rockets, and how these women were turning to knitting. And so I started seeing that right away, and I was like, that is cool. Then I was aware of this pattern for hats for the IDF that's been around for a long time for the Israel Defense Forces. And this black hat is just a 2x2 rib hat, easy peasy. And I thought like, oh, these hats, like they're knitting hats. And at first it was like, do they really want these hats? Or is this like what we want to be making? And then I saw right away a designer I didn't even know before named Hila Ellert posted a pattern for a Guatemalan worry doll, like a cute little crocheted doll. And I posted that. I didn't even know her yet. I reposted it and I thought, like, it is so heartbreaking to think of an entire country of children who can't sleep at night, who need to whisper their worries to a little tiny doll that they put under their pillow. Like, that is not a system for national security. That is not a mental health system. But it became one. It became a real one. The making of it, as you've said, and the having of it. And I got to go do things that were like fiber arts, and it was incredible. So I donated yarn to the people doing knitting with evacuees in hotels. I went to a hospital and handed out worry dolls and cards to families and sick children. And then I donated in the first trip 250 hats for the IDF, some in person at a bus station for soldiers leaving for deployment, and others through a yarn shop called the Gourmet Yarn Shop in Israel, in a town that was actually attacked just last week. It felt incredible, the love in Israel, like just the feeling of like their openness to our love and our support felt incredible. It was something I will carry with me forever. These things I've been writing about, the sweater from 75 years ago, it's happening right now. I mean, there's a story of a flight attendant. I can share the story with you of a flight attendant who works for El Al, Israel's national airline, who's been knitting teddy bears for each of the hostages. And
Thank you for sharing all of that. And do you want to share about anybody you met in Israel? Any other inspiring fiber artists? I'm not trying to switch gears so abruptly, but
yeah, and I got a WhatsApp saying, you have to look up this designer, Lisa Rodrigue. Her husband pops out from a gate and he leads us down this alley, and in their backyard, it's like a little compound. It's like this series of little houses. There's a weaving house, there's a sewing house, and then the main house is like this little chalet of knitting with like, it's all wood paneled with this like peaked ceiling and like floor to ceiling shelves filled with yarn and beautiful things. And then there are
it's a
these dress.
dream.
It's like an oasis. It just feels so good. So we stayed in touch, and I've stayed in touch with, as I said, there was such an openness to the love that we brought. So I've stayed in close contact with all of the people that I met in Israel, and Lisa and I ended up just like texting all the time on WhatsApp. And um, she's out of nowhere said, I think I'm coming to Vogue Knitting. And I said, Okay, but you know that New York, it was the weekend of like the airports people trying to shut down our airports. I was like, you know, you're going to see some things here that are going to be a little tough to see. And she's like, I'm a proud Jewish woman. I'm a proud Israeli. I'm coming with a full and open heart. And I just want to be with knitters and I want to see all the beautiful things. So she's coming, and she, in the process of our back and forth, this is all since December, in the last month, she designed a pattern. So I went to a knitting group right after I came back from Israel, and I told them about the trip. And then they said, we would love a pattern. Like, could she do a pattern for us that's like some sort of Jewish object? It's a very simple sort of oversized triangular wrap, and it starts really small and just grows bigger and bigger, and it goes from dark to light, and she calls it the October 7th shawl, and it's about starting in like the absolute dark and small and hopeless place and feeling like rebuilding and getting stronger. The black comes up again because like in between the color blocks, because the black is still with us, but it's not like all of us, and we're not going to get like consumed by it. And then throughout, she has a textured stitch pattern, like a motif of the Magen David, or like a Jewish star. So there's like the star just in the texture of the wrap. We started in a dark place, but we have been resilient before, and we'll continue to be resilient. It's this strange world that we're in. I mean, when we talk to our kids, we want to say, no, people are accepting and loving, and people, like, we want to believe these things, and we've seen a lot of behavior that doesn't really make us feel like that's true right now. But I that's okay. Like, I can't. It's interesting, in our community, in our Facebook group, we had people right away start to do posts of like, ban this knitter, we can't follow. And I was like, nope. I don't want to live like that. I don't want, first of all, who am I to judge a person? I don't feel that any of us should be that, like, there's one judge over the world, right? I'm not that judge. And it's not my place to do that. And nor do I believe, and this is also a Jewish value, in like tarnishing someone's name, like harming someone's name. Is not what we're about. And I feel like we want to show up and be positive. We want to show up and be with the people who bring light. We don't have to agree on everything in this world. Like, we can have space for people with wide range of experiences and beliefs and still all come together to make this a better place, and to in our case, experience like the joy of making beautiful things. I want to say this Thursday, in advance of Holocaust Remembrance Day, I still have sort of my core connection to the Holocaust. There is a Beautifully Jewish will be focused on the little red dress. So you're going to get to hear the voice of Judy Fleischer-Kolb, the woman who wore the dress, and another unbelievable crafter named Faye Levinson. So that is coming up this week. I will get you links, but everything can be found at tabletmag.com/beautifullyjewish. That's sort of the portal to everything. So the podcast, the community, the knit along. There's also a really vibrant Facebook group. It's been growing. We added 1,000 people last week. It's crazy. So there's a really vibrant Facebook group. It's Jews and a lot of allies of Jews, which I've noticed because I watch who gets in, and it's really fun to see so much support. And it's just a nice, beautiful space. People are sharing unbelievable makes. It's an international group, so that's just Facebook. You can go and look for Beautifully Jewish.
Thank you so much for sharing today, Tanya. It was so good to see you.
So good to see you. Can't wait to see you in person or on the knit along.
Right? All right. See ya. Bye.
Yeah, thanks, Kristy.
For the full interview with Tanya Singer, please head on over to patreon.com/KristyGlassKnits. Thank you so much.